bit of PHP, etc. And why do I have to explain that? It's because my mother wants to know everything about my job, and she doesn't understand, but she wants to understand. So this is the reason why I have to explain that. Why do we write software? Because we love problems. Yes, we love to have our lives complicated with machines and a little bit more difficult to understand. The world with computers is pretty much harder to understand than the world without computers. And because the customer is asking us to solve the problem, or because we are just a bunch of geeks, you know, and we love that, we love technology. Maybe that's just because we love to solve problems rather than love problems. Maybe just because the customer is asking us but is paying for that. So that's the reason why we're writing software. And because we are just really geeks, and that's it. Sometimes when a customer has got a request, shall we do it with computing? Shall we do it with a program? Shall we do it a dynamic site with using a dynamic language on the web? I often say it depends on the amount of data you have to handle. And for example, in banks or in military, they had to use computers because they have a large amount of data to handle. And the highest the frequency of data processing, of data changing, the higher you need a computer program. So as you follow the x-axis and the y-axis, if you go right and up, you necessarily need to compute it. And if you're on the left-hand side and the bottom of the y-axis, probably you won't need it, and you would just need static files, for example. That's the reason why sometimes you need to write a program, sometimes you don't. Why do we program? Basically because we are lazy. The guy who invented the wheelbarrow, he was a lazy guy. It was somebody who just wanted to transport things from one point to another without being too tired at the end, and he didn't want to make several movements. He just wanted to make it once or twice. So how can we explain programming? This is not the way. This is my way to explain programming to my mother or to anyone else. So even my father, even someone you don't know. You can explain it using metaphor, and the correct metaphor for my mother is cooking. She cooks very, very, very good jams. I love those jams, and she's she's an expert in jam. I'm not an expert in cooking, of course. The only recipe that I know is tomato with eggs. That's it. But I can explain because I adapted the metaphor to my mother. How do we make jam? We have fruits, we need fruits. We need other ingredients, such as sugar, etc., other spices. How can we do it? What can we do with it? We have to pull them into something and cook them, etc. We follow the recipe, which is written or not, but it exists. The process exists. What does the recipe do? It indicates the quantities of ingredients, how to add them, what shall we do with them, cook them, for how long, when do we stop, etc. The whole stuff. And with the result, what do we do with the result? We put it in a jar. So, moving this metaphor to programming, the ingredients, the data. The recipe, that's the program, that's the different transformation you have to do with the data. And the jars, sometimes it's a database, for example. It can be just a printed result on the screen. It can be anything else. But in order to explain it, you have to explain it with a metaphor. And the right metaphor is jam jars. So, back to the salt. Expected results. Jam in a jar. Raw data, the fruits. Refined data, we have cleaned the data, we have cleaned the fruits, and we adding small ingredients, libraries or something. We have a process scenario to follow, which is the specifications. For example, it can be the specs, the documents. The scope and the spec documents say which data are we processing, how to transform them, what for, and the different scenarios. What happens when it's not cooked enough? What happens when there is no sugar left, etc. And then we store them into the database. The next point, it was to explain free software to non-techie people and how to explain it with figures. First, you all know that because you're a techie guy, and this talk is not intended to you, it's intended to the persons you will talk to later on. What is program? You need to explain it beforehand. It's an idea, and some guy has got an idea, and so he writes specs, he writes a little stuff, or he dives into code, for example. Sorry, there is a binary over there, just out of the screen, I'm sorry. My fault. What do programmers do? What do you do for a living? I write code. No, that's not enough. What is code? What is exactly code? It's text. Just say that it's text. It's text written by human beings, yes, no. No, you can't read that, even if it's Python. If it's Perl, you can't read it, but it's been written by human beings, you know. What does this text do? It gives just orders to the computer. And once you've explained that, a lot of people start to think, yeah, okay, you're a programmer, so you give orders to a computer to do whatever you want to do. And then these orders are just, you know, manipulating the data in some way or another, and then it sends back a result. The code is often transformed into a binary. I know there are interpreters, I know there are compiled language. Don't go too much into detail with that, they don't care. The code, that's the specification, and then you have the binary, which is the result, the jam in the jar. And then how to explain free software and free software movement and open source, etc. So you have two distribution models when your mom cooks some jam and wants to give it to someone else. She can just distribute a couple of jars with jam in it, and she can give those jars with the recipe. What could Mrs. Smith, the woman who's been given the jar, can do with it? She can put jam on a toast and eat it. She can use the recipe, the same recipe she's received, to make exactly the same jam. She can change and adapt. Oh yes, why not adding a little spice, or why not adding lemon, or why not removing something from the recipe, etc. And she can give it back, and what will she give back? She will give back the same. Maybe jars, or maybe jars with the recipe, the new recipe, or another recipe. Ad infinitum. That's how I explain free software movement to my mother. Because you know where it's going. Putting jam, it's to run the program. Access the source code, it's exactly the same as reading the recipe and trying to make it the same way. Change it, adapt it to your needs. That's the third freedom of the free software. And give it back, it's a redistribution of a modifier or an unchanged version of this. You know, you see what I mean? It's free software. And when I explain free software to my mother, for example, I explain it, you see, you know, when you're giving jars of jam to your neighbor, for example, with proprietary software, you don't have the right to give the recipe. And usually people say, oh, that's wrong. Yes, I know that's wrong, but that's the way the industry works. And free software works the way we're all neighbors, we're all on this planet, and we all share things, share recipes, because we all love and enjoy jam, and we all love to share the jams, etc. That's it for today, not bad, eh? There are other fields to explore and to translate into the regular guy language, and I didn't try to make them, but it was some ideas. Why are there so many programming languages? Say, for example, I switched from PHP to Python,
And I had to explain my mom, and it was really difficult. Why do you change language? They are the one who was bad? No, it wasn't bad. It was just not my way of thinking. I wanted to see new things. You know, well, it does the same. Yes, it does the same. It does programs, but it doesn't do the same, exactly the same way. So it's very difficult to understand for non-geeks the way that there are plenty of programming languages that are all different. Which language do you want to pick if you want to program? It depends on the persons, for example. We don't know. The third one is a very important one. Programming is not sorcery. We are not Harry Potter. No, we haven't got a magic wand that we just move around and then the computer does exactly what you want to do. No, sometimes it doesn't do. Sometimes it's not just possible. No. You can't have a jam out of a computer, for example. Another way to explain, another thing to explain that is very hard is how to write specs that a customer or a normal, regular guy would understand, and a programmer would perfectly understand what is specified in these documents and how to manage projects. It's very difficult to imagine that someone has to understand that programming and IT project managing is quite a little bit different from building a house or building a car, something like that. Other things, test-driven development. This one is quite straightforward to explain to people that already understand programming. Source code management, revisions. It's a little bit different to explain. You have to explain it with, for example, a wiki or a timeline. You just write the timeline and say, you see, I've made this change, this change, this change. Oh, I thought it was the wrong way. I can revert them, for example, and say, oh, that's a useful tool. And tools that help building tools, frameworks. I really enjoy, for example, explain the way that I've got something that is more powerful than my programming language in order to, you know, generate stuff very easily. All of these illustrations were of public domain or Creative Commons, and this talk may eventually land on my website, joelprintemps.net, at some point, maybe today if I've got time, and if I got not bored. No, bugger off and educate your neighbors. Any questions?
Anyone got any questions? I've got one. What's your position on marmalade?
Marmalade is a fork of jam.
That's a good point. I like it. Good answer.
And you have got the right to make forks, of course.
So
it's
anyone
not
got
a
any
bad thing.
Anyone got any better questions than that, or I'm just going to keep making cheesy jokes? No? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You're welcome.